My wife didn't know I was a secret billionaire, heir, and signed the divorce papers mocking me. What happened next shocked her. Yes, this is another story you would love to hear. Let's dive into it. My name is Boyen Rivers, and I need you to understand something before I tell you any of this. I am not a man who enjoys being underestimated, but for 6 years, I let it happen. I chose it, actually. I chose the worn jacket and the scuffed shoes and the modest job and the rented townhouse because a dying old man who loved me more than I deserved asked me to prove that I was worth what he was leaving behind. I chose all of it. What I did not choose, what I never anticipated, was that the woman I married would look me in the eye across a courtroom table, uncap her pen like she was opening a bottle of champagne, and laugh. Not a polite laugh. Not an uncomfortable one, a full, open, shoulders-back laugh that made her attorney look down at his papers and pretend he hadn't heard it. That was the morning of our divorce. I remember every detail of that room, the smell of old wood and cheap coffee, the way the fluorescent light above the table buzzed faintly, like it couldn't commit to staying on. Stina was wearing a designer blazer she'd bought on credit. I knew because I'd seen the card statement. And she looked like a woman who had already won something. Her hair was done. Her posture was deliberate. She had dressed for victory before the battle was even finished. She slid the papers toward me after she signed. Her pen left the paper with a small, theatrical flourish. "Sign yours too, Boyen," she said, still smiling. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I picked up my pen. I did not look at her. I had spent considerable energy in the weeks leading up to this morning, preparing for this exact moment. Deciding what my face would do, deciding what my hands would do, deciding what I would and would not allow myself to feel in this room. I had been thorough. I am, by nature and by training, a thorough man. I signed. And then my phone vibrated against my thigh. I glanced at it under the table just briefly, the way you check something you already know the answer to but need to confirm anyway. The message was from my grandfather's estate attorney, a man named Aldrich's personal counsel, who had been managing the trust paperwork for 14 months. It read, "Sir, the board confirmed. You are the sole heir. The announcement is Tuesday." I put the phone face down on the table. I stood. I buttoned my jacket. The worn one, the one she'd once told a dinner party was very Boyen, in a tone that meant something else entirely. And I looked at Stina Rivers, my wife of 6 years, who was already texting someone with the small, satisfied energy of a person who believed they had just escaped something small. "I hope you get everything you think you deserve, Stina," I said. She didn't look up. I walked out. Please, before I continue, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. There are things about my grandfather that I never told Stina, not because I was hiding him specifically, but because to explain Aldrich Rivers properly, you would have to explain everything, and explaining everything would have unraveled the one condition he had asked me to honor. But let me tell you now, Aldrich Rivers was not a man who appeared in newspapers. He was not a man who attended industry conferences or gave keynote addresses or allowed himself to be photographed at charity galas with a glass of wine and a rehearsed smile. In 40 years of building what would become Rivers Continental Group, a private conglomerate spanning shipping lanes, energy infrastructure, and land acquisition across 4 continents, my grandfather had managed to remain so deliberately invisible that most financial analysts had never once connected his name to the empire he ran. He had built a dynasty in silence, and the silence was intentional, and the intention was grief. His grief was my father. My father, his only son, had been handed wealth early, publicly, loudly. Aldrich had been proud back then, in the way young, successful men are proud before they understand what pride costs. He had put my father's name in rooms. He had let the world know, and the world had done what it does with young men who are handed too much too soon. It had flattered him and dazzled him, and slowly, over the course of 15 years, it had taken him apart. My father died when I was 19, reckless, hollowed out, broke in every way a person can be broke. He had spent the spectacle of wealth without ever understanding the substance of it. Aldrich never forgave himself. So when I was 26, when he called me to Zurich and sat me down in the back of a black SUV outside a law firm and handed me a sealed envelope, The first thing he said was not about money. It was about character. "Everything I built is yours," he said. His voice was the kind that had spent decades being obeyed without being raised, but you must prove you can hold it without it holding you. The condition was written into the inheritance clause with the precision of a man who had watched his own son dissolve. I was to live as an ordinary man for a minimum of 5 years. No access to the trust, no announcement, no use of the Rivers name in any financial or professional context. If I honored the clause completely, everything transferred to me upon his death. If I broke it, if I accessed funds early, if I revealed myself, if I used the name as leverage even once, the entire estate would activate a charitable foundation directive and I would receive nothing. I had agreed without hesitation. I moved back to the city. I took a job as a mid-level logistics coordinator, a position that used perhaps a fifth of what I was actually capable of, which was its own quiet discipline. I rented a small apartment on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator worked 3 days out of 5. I drove a used car that made a sound on cold mornings that I eventually just accepted as its personality. 8 months into that life, I met Stina. She was at a colleague's dinner party. Bright, magnetic, the kind of beautiful that has opinions about itself. She pursued me with a boldness I found disarming, because I was not, at that point, a man women typically pursued. She saw something in me that I genuinely believed, was the real thing. Not the name, not the number in a trust document. Me. I told myself I would tell her the truth before the 5 years ended. I told myself she loved me. I was wrong about the second part, and I waited too long on the first. There are things you don't know about the people closest to you until it's too late to do anything useful with the information. Stina's mother called her 3 weeks before the divorce papers were filed. I know this because Stina told me about it afterward, not as a confession, but as evidence of how unreasonable her mother was. She recounted it with the casual irritation of someone describing a slow driver. Her mother had said, "There's something about that man I've never been able to explain. Something still." Stina had said, "He makes $58,000 a year and we live in a rented townhouse. I'm 34. I'm done being still." What Stina didn't know, what her mother never told her, was that 6 months prior, at a hospital board fundraising gala her employer had brought her to as staff, her mother had watched a room full of powerful people greet me with a deference she couldn't explain. She had asked the gala host who I was. He had said only, "Someone you don't need to know about." She had never been able to reconcile that image with the man her daughter described as going nowhere. She sat with her phone after Stina hung up and whispered to the empty kitchen, "He always reminded me of his grandfather." She didn't know how precise that was. I knew the announcement was coming on Tuesday. I had known for 2 months. The estate lawyers had been preparing it for over a year, coordinating across 3 legal jurisdictions, drafting language that would introduce Rivers Continental Group to the public for the first time in its 40-year history, and simultaneously introduce me as its heir and executive chairman. My grandfather had died 4 months before the divorce. Quietly, in a private hospital room, with me sitting beside him and no photographers within 100 miles. Before he lost consciousness for the last time, he had looked at me with the particular exhaustion of a man who has finally finished a very long task and said, "You held. I wasn't sure you would." The press release went to 3 major financial newswires simultaneously at 7 Tuesday morning. It included a photograph, me in a suit, standing in the lobby of our headquarters, looking exactly like what I had always been and never announced. By 9, 14 financial publications had picked it up. By 11, general news. By 1 in the afternoon, Stina's co-worker walked into her office holding a phone and said, "Isn't this your husband?" I was not there to see her face when she read it, but I have imagined it enough times that it feels like a memory. She would have read the headline first, then the number, 4.7 billion, then the photograph, then she would have scrolled, the way people scroll when they're looking for the mistake, for the explanation that makes the impossible ordinary again. She would have found the detail buried in a business profile, the one that said, "Sources confirm Rivers lived as a private citizen for 6 years as a condition of his grandfather's inheritance clause designed to test character independent of wealth." 6 years. the length of our entire marriage. I know her hands were shaking because she told me later. She said she set her coffee cup down because she was afraid of dropping it. She said the room felt like it was breathing wrong. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number, my estate attorney, reaching out as I had asked him to, professionally and without cruelty. There's a matter regarding the divorce settlement terms you'll need to be aware of. Settlement. She had laughed through those negotiations. She had taken the townhouse, the car, the spousal support. I had agreed to everything without a single counteroffer. She finally understood why. People always asked me, in the years of the quiet life, how I never broke. How I sat through Stina's dinner party comments. Boyen isn't really career-driven, and he's more of a comfort person, you know? Without saying the thing that would have ended all of it in a sentence. The honest answer is that I heard my grandfather's voice every single time. The day you stop controlling yourself is the day you've already lost the thing that makes you worthy of what I'm giving you. I treated that as law. Every dismissal, every eye roll, every moment Stina made me small in a room full of people, I absorbed it and I chose stillness. Not because I was weak, because I was building something inside myself that no inheritance clause could manufacture. Patience as architecture, restraint as proof. But here is the detail that still sits heavily in me. She filed 2 months before the clause expired. 60 days. If she had waited 60 more days, she would have been standing beside me at the announcement, introduced to the world as my wife. She didn't wait, and I had to decide what that meant. She wrote me a letter, not a text. A handwritten letter, 4 pages, delivered through my attorney's office by hand. I know she drove it there herself because the receptionist mentioned it. It said she hadn't known. It said she was sorry. It said she had been afraid, not cruel. And though I understood the distinction she was drawing, I also knew those two things were not always as separate as people needed them to be. But then she wrote about the hospital corridor, her father's death, 3 years into our marriage. The way I had sat on the floor with her until 3 in the morning without saying a single word, just present, just there, just my hand available when she reached for it. She said she thought about that night more than she allowed herself to admit. She wrote, "I think I made the worst mistake of my life because I couldn't see what was right in front of me." My attorney delivered it as requested. I read it once, carefully, the whole way through. Then I folded it and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. My executive assistant had worked for the Rivers family long enough to understand one thing. When something didn't move me, I left it out. When something did, I put it away. She watched me more carefully after that. She came to the gala. I had known she would. Not arrogance, I simply knew Stina. 6 years gives a man a thorough education in a person's patterns, and her pattern when genuinely shaken was always the same. She didn't call, she showed up. Overdressed, overprepared, armed with rehearsed words that would dissolve the moment she saw my face. She had borrowed a midnight blue dress from a friend. She slipped in through a door error. Someone's +1 hadn't arrived. She moved through 500 guests, heart loud, scanning. She found me at the center of the room. I was wearing a charcoal suit and speaking to a cluster of board members with the calm authority that had always lived in me, the authority she had never looked closely enough to find. I felt her eyes before I saw her. I looked up. We made eye contact across the room. I did not look away. I did not look angry or triumphant or wounded. I looked patient, the way a man looks when he has already made peace with everything that needed peace and is now simply observing what the world does next. She started walking toward me, and then Petra put her hand on my arm. Her name was Petra Voss. Her father was a Belgian industrialist. She spoke 4 languages and had known who I was for 3 years. My grandfather had introduced us once, quietly, at a private family occasion, the way Aldrich did everything, without announcement, without pressure, just placing 2 people in the same room and stepping back. She had never pursued me. I had called her 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. We had shared 4 dinners, nothing declared, nothing announced, but the way she stood beside me said what titles couldn't. Stina stopped walking when she saw Petra's hand on my arm. I watched her understand it all at once. This woman knew who I was from the beginning. She hadn't needed to be told. She hadn't needed to be convinced. I said something quietly to Petra. She glanced once towards Stina, not unkindly, with the calm of complete understanding, and excused herself. I walked to Stina. I stopped 3 feet away. You shouldn't be here. I know. Then why? Her rehearsed words were gone. All of it, dissolved, exactly as I knew it would be. Because I never actually saw you, she said, and her voice broke on the last word. Not once. Not really. And I needed to say that to your face. I had made my decision 2 days before the gala. I had spoken to my attorney. I had spoken to Petra, honestly, the way she deserved, and she had said, do what you can live with in 10 years, not what feels satisfying tonight. That was the kind of woman she was. I held that sentence like a compass. I thought about the letter in my drawer every day since it arrived. I thought about the hospital corridor. I thought about who Stina had been before fear made her cruel, because I never confused her cruelty for her totality. I knew what lived underneath it. That was perhaps my most painful form of intelligence, but I also knew this. Love without honesty is just a comfortable version of loneliness. And Stina had chosen, for 6 years, not to see me. Not the secret. She couldn't have known the secret. But me. The man on the floor at 3 a.m, the man who never raised his voice, the man who was always, quietly, entirely there. She had looked past all of it, searching for something louder. Standing in that corridor, with the string quartet filtering softly through the walls, I looked at her. Really looked. And said, "It's too late, Stina." Not with cruelty, with grief. The kind that has already finished its crying. I walked back into the ballroom. She sat in her car for 41 minutes when she got home. I know this because she wrote about it. Publicly, a year later, in a piece that would reach more people than either of us anticipated. She wrote that she didn't cry immediately. She sat still, the way a person sits when they're searching for something dropped in the dark. What she found was this. She had spent 6 years trying to reshape me into someone the rooms she wanted to impress would respect. Someone louder, more visibly impressive, and when I refused to become that, she had decided the problem was mine. She had filed for divorce not because she stopped loving me. She filed because she was ashamed of loving a man she believed the world wouldn't validate. The irony required no explanation. She went upstairs. She called her mother before she even set down her bag. "You were right," she said, before her mother could speak. Her mother didn't say what she could have said. She said, "Come home for a few days." Before she packed, Stina sat at her desk and wrote one letter. Not to me, not to my attorney, to herself. Every dismissal, every cruelty, every moment she chose pride over presence. She sealed it and wrote on the front, "Read when you're about to do this to someone again." Then she put it in her own drawer. 1 year after the divorce, a profile piece ran in an editorial journal. The byline read, "Stina Rivers." The headline, "The divorce that changed my life, and not the way you'd think." It was not about my money. It was not a confessional engineered for attention. It was a serious, self-lacerating, quietly brilliant piece about the architecture of self-deception, how a person builds contempt for others from the unexamined rubble of their own fear. It was the most honest thing she had ever written, because it was the first time she had written without performing. 400,000 shares in 2 weeks. My EA printed it without comment and left it on my desk. I read it once. I put it in the drawer, next to the letter. Then I sat for a long moment, in the quiet of an office that overlooked a city I had once navigated in a car with a cold morning personality, and I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a year. 3 rings. "Hello?" Careful, not expecting. "I read it," I said. Silence. "It doesn't fix anything," she said quietly. "No," I agreed. A longer silence, the kind that isn't empty. "How's school?" I asked. She exhaled, the sound of 12 months releasing at once. "Hard, really hard. But I think that's the point." "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I think that's the point." The call lasted 2 hours. I won't tell you what was said after that. Some things belong only to the people inside them. And honestly, that privacy, that small protected thing, feels like the first new beginning either of us had built in a very long time.